the view of Islam is very radical in that it's all about giving up your rights for the sake of Allah, but never relinquishing your responsibilities. And that is really difficult for people to do. And that's why it's the fastest way to get to God. And if you look at the Prophet ﷺ's life, it is a life of somebody who's constantly giving up his haqq for the sake of God. But he's never neglecting his responsibility to God. He's constantly giving up his haqq. I mean, look, throughout his life, he's always giving up his haqq for others. He had every right to want retribution. He didn't take it. With his family, he had huquq, he would give them up. But he would never relinquish his responsibilities. And so this idea of even if your parents have not fulfilled their responsibilities, you do not relinquish their rights. You don't use that as an excuse. Now, the parent has to recognize that if the child is in this state, did the parent have anything to do with that? See, that's the parent's tribulation. It's not the child. That's the parent's tribulation. They have to realize, and that's why Imam Ali radiallahu anhu, a man came to him once and he complained about his son, how bad he was treating him. And he said, how did you treat him when he was young? And the man became ashamed and he said, I mistreated him. And he said, then what do you expect? In other words, in this culture they say it's payback time, right? But you don't want to be that person, because what it means to your heart is that you destroy your heart. So particularly in our culture, where we have a lot of issues with our parents, you see. I mean, this culture, we have a lot of issues with our parents. People, especially people that convert to Islam. That becomes a real challenge when you come into Islam and you're given this new view about, you're supposed to kiss your mother between her eyes, as a show of respect, that you should never say oof, which in this culture it would be like something like that, just like that. And that's what oof is in Arabic. I mean, it's the least show of consternation. So for those of us who come into this culture, now also for Arabs and Indo-Pak first generation that have grown up here, who have been introduced into this idea, this modern idea, that's a challenge for you also, because of people that you've gone to school with, people that you heard talk about their parents. I mean, Muslims, we're not supposed to say these things about our parents, and it's difficult because a lot of people have real justification for being upset. But it's that struggle in the self. I mean, that's what mujahada is. It's struggling against those desires for revenge, against those desires for, you weren't there when I was young, why should I be there for you now? That's all demonic. Because in the end of the day, this is about you. It's not about your parents. And it's about your relationship with Allah. And that is why when you look at your parents, you have to see them as a tribulation from Allah. They are a blessing, but they're also a tribulation. The ibtila is that you have to recognize that the first manifestation of gratitude to Allah translated in the world is showing gratitude to your parents. That is how gratitude to Allah translates in the world. That is the first translation of a sense of gratitude to Allah, is gratitude toward the parents. And it's getting more difficult for people to recognize that. And part of the real crises in the modern world is this disruption, because what happens from this is a disruption on every level. You see, because you don't have respect for authority. That's what the 60s in this country were about. It was rebelling against the parents, and then that translated as rebellion against authority as well. So authority loses. And the Muslims, we are not anarchists, we're not revolutionaries. We respect authority. It does not mean that we don't stand firm when authority is acting unjustly. But we still recognize authority in the world is a blessing from Allah, even when it has transgressive qualities. It's still a blessing because it's better than anarchy. And the same for the parents. Even when the parents have qualities that are problematic for you, the fact that they're your parents, the fact that they brought you into the world, that was how you came into the world, that in itself is a blessing. And you have to recognize that. And to me is your return. In other words, that's the whole point. This is your test. And know that this is how I am going to base my judgment of you in the next world, is how you showed gratitude in this world or not. This ilayya al-masir. Know that when you're doing this, keep me in mind. And there's an amazing thing. Sahad al-Tusturi radiyallahu anhu said, when he was 3 years old, he used to watch his uncle pray in the night, Muhammad bin Suwar. He was 3 years old. And his uncle would notice that he would sit and look at him. And his uncle said to him once, "Do you want to remember Allah?" And he said, "Yes." He said, "Then say these 3 things 3 times before you go to sleep. Allahu ma'i, Allahu nadiri, Allahu shahidi. Allah is with me, Allah sees me, and Allah is my witness." And so Sahal said that he did that for some time. He's 3 years old. I mean, he was a famous wali and scholar. But he did this, he said, for a long time. And then his uncle, his maternal uncle, said to him once, "Have you remembered to say that?" He said, "Yes, I've said it." And he said as he got older, he would increase it. He would tell him, "Say it now 10 times every time you go." And then he would say 20. And then he would say that throughout the day. And he said that he found such a sweetness in his heart from saying that. And then when he entered just before he reached manhood, his uncle said to him, "How have you found that? Allahu ma'i, Allahu nadiri, Allahu shahidi." And he said, "I find such a sweetness in saying it." And he said, "Have you realized it? In other words, are you certain about it now that Allah is with you, Allah sees you, and Allah is your witness?" And he said, "Yes." And he said, "How can you disobey him if he's with you, he sees you, and he's your witness?" And Sahal said that for him, that was it. That's tarbiyah. I mean, that is raising a child, because life is about these ethical challenges of being in the world, because every situation for you is going to be an ethically challenging situation. How do I behave in this situation? What do I do? And then Allah says immediately after that, وَإِن جَاهَدَاكَ, if they strive with you to make you ascribe unto me partners, عَلَىٰ أَن تُشْرِكَ بِمَا لَيْسَ لَكَ بِهِ عِلْمٍ فَلَا تُطِعْهُمَا وَصَاحِبْهُمَا فِي الدُّنْيَا مَعْرُوفًا. If they strive to make you ascribe partners to me and say something you have no knowledge of doing, then don't obey them. I mean, look at that. What does Luqman say to his son? Don't commit shirk. What is Allah saying? If they tell you to commit shirk, don't do it. Right? I mean, in other words, that is how bad it has to be before you disobey your parents. If they tell you to disobey Allah, that's the only time you disobey them. And even then, you're supposed to do it in a way where it's with gentleness. I can't do that. وَصَاحِبْهُمَا فِي الدُّنْيَا مَعْرُوفًا, and consort with them in the world in a kindly way. وَاتَّبِعْ سَبِيلَ مَنْ أَنَابَ إِلَيَّ, and follow the path of the one who turns to me. That's the path you should be following, the one who's turning to me. ثُمَّ إِلَيَّ مَرْجِعُكُمْ, and to me you will return, is your return. فَأُنَبِّئُكُمْ بِمَا كُنْتُمْ تَعْمَلُونَ, and I will inform you about what you were doing.